So I fall very softly on the neg on this issue. So I have a couple of anecdotes that are the reason why I do so. So but I went to school for a very long period of time in Montgomery, Alabama, which has historically been one of the worst school districts in the country. For those who aren't aware of the history of Montgomery, Alabama School District, it has a very racialized history. So once integration schools happened, a lot of white families decided to create private schools that were fully based for the intent of getting out of the integrated schools for the separation of the races to continue, which has led to the predominantly black schools to be very harmful, adversely affected. Has led to very little funding, has led to very little success, and has been an institutional problem that should be addressed. So, that being said, it would be intuitive for me to be on the act. However, I also had other instances where I've talked to people about race, and I've talked to people of color about race and how they feel about being mandated to be integrated into other societies that are not of their own. These people have felt very close to their own community. I know a lot of people who prefer to be in black communities and see them, and it's very, very helpful, and I feel the same way. I think there's a lot of good that could be made in racially segregated communities. I don't think it should be because of legal reasons, but I do think that a lot of the positive effects that we see in our societies are due to having very insular communities, and like the gentleman pointed out earlier, that the black community has produced a lot of positive effects within its own community, and that should be addressed in this resolution. What would happen if we mandate integration? Do all these positive effects go away? But before I get into that, I think we should go over some givens that were not addressed in prior speeches. One thing, people don't like being told what to do, especially when they have an opinion in the opposite. I think to the gentleman who gave the first speech in the neg, obviously, I do believe that in the long term people will be accustomed to it and it won't be the problem. But in the short term, people will not want to do this, and it's very bad for students who are of color to go through that very short term. I think that would have been a good answer to my question. We don't want people to be bullied for any sort of period of time. It's very bad for the students, and they shouldn't be sacrificial lambs for political reasons. Second, a lot of the questions on does integration make people succeed more? Yes. However, a lot of those have to do with income. Income makes people who live in higher income areas do better academically because income matters. When you have naturally in a lot of places that are integrated, there tend to be higher levels of income. I think that money does a lot of good. I think there are studies that show that money doesn't do as much good, but I think that has to do more with how it's allocated rather than money being in and of itself not very good. Now I'll go back to my point about upholding the good parts of the black community. W.B. Du Bois and Malcolm X made a lot of good points about this. They really believe that having an insular black community would lead to more black success. And I think that while we focus more on K through 12, I think one of the things that we can look at are HBCUs. HBCUs have historically been to provide African Americans with a placement before they were allowed to be in predominantly white institutions, a place to be educated and to go out and become successful. Now after when the schools integrated, the schools have suffered a lot. And currently in places like Kentucky and Florida, there have been legislation trying to pass it so that a lot of these institutions are closed. And I think that's very, very dangerous for a lot of reasons. I think before we do any of that, we should actually address what makes HBCUs intuitively good. Is there anything that makes them intuitively good? I think a lot of things do. I think the one reason why people who are advocates of HBCUs try to promote them up despite their lowering graduation rates do so is because they are a welcoming community for black youth. And I think that before we decide to just mandate a completely diverse society, I think we should actually look and see what could we extract from these more segregated communities, and will these positive effects still resonate after this is done? And any questions?
Questions for the gentleman? I have a question. So, given the massive importance of HBCUs, what can we do to promote these communities in showed that HBCUs were given less resources than comparable institutions. Is this a result of underlying prejudice in society? Is the best way to solve this by integrating? Do you think that there's a way to allocate more resources to these schools and retain those communities without integrating? What do you think?
You're right. So this is why correlational studies on race being tied to academic success don't really make a whole lot of sense. In the 1960s, HBCUs were 100% black. Their graduation rates are much higher than they are now. There were white people who go to HBCUs. Integration did not, you could look at that correlation and say that integration made HBCUs worse. That obviously, correlation doesn't imply causation there, so that doesn't make any sense. So you can look at what private institutions do. Like Howard is the landmark, like it's what you would define as a very good HBCU, a private institution, and people call it like the Harvard of HBCUs. Howard's graduation rate is like 60, I think it was 65% the last time I checked. Harvard's graduation rate is like 99%. There's not a whole lot we can do about that, and one of the reasons why we can't is because like the upper echelon of black students are going to go to Harvard, they're not going to go to Harvard. There's not a lot we can do about that. So we just have to say for ourselves, can we save all HBCUs? I think the answer is no. I think we should try to save the ones that are doing best, and I think we should give the ones that aren't doing so well an opportunity to improve. But if we decide that having if you want to let everyone into college, you're going to have very diluted student pools. And there's not much you can do about that. And I mean, that's the fact of the matter. But I do think that HBCUs that are doing well serve a very good purpose.
Further questions? Ms. Shane.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, it's not clear to me on principle why it's raising the rates. Even though you admitted to being in the modest negative debate, you mentioned coercion as an issue. On the other hand, there are many ways that federal laws coerce us to do things for an end that the government society is good for the public. The second example was that being in socialized communities of your race or ethnicity is meaningful, or somehow mutually exclusive with integration. In Yale, where diversity numbers are designed to be represented in a certain way, students who choose to either have friends of diverse backgrounds or choose rather to be mostly friends with people of the same background. Why are those two things mutually exclusive?
Right. So my first point on coercion, like I said, it's not the strongest point because in the long term it should fix itself. The latter point though is a lot more important. As someone who goes to Yale and who's black, I have white friends and I have black friends. I enjoy both groups of friends. However, I am part of organizations that are predominantly, if not like 100% black, and I really do enjoy those organizations, and I think those organizations are good because they allow for people to be a part of the community. I'm a member of the Black Men's Union. I think the Black Men's Union does a lot for black men on campus. And I think that's what you see sometimes when integration happens. Like people still cling to a part of their identity that they can't get rid of. Like you can't not, just by virtue of being diversity, you can't just erase part of that identity. You're always going to cling to it, and it's very important that you do. I don't think that there's a problem with people doing that. I do think that I will say this though, so I don't want to contradict myself in any other further questions, but I do think that the key to solving racism, if racism can be solved, and I'm not sure, it would be through integration. I don't think that you can be segregated and solve. I think that's one of the problems with Marcus Garvey, is that he just thought that if we just leave, then the problem will go away because it wasn't there in 1380. Like it seems like that's intuitively wrong.
And with that, the gentleman thanks.
Okay, so I'd like to focus my speech today a little bit on the mutual benefits of integrating schools. And so in the fact that the diversity that results as a result of integration is not only socioeconomic, but it's also racial, but it's also academic as well. So towns and school districts that are not naturally racially or socioeconomically diverse often tend to be insular in their beliefs and worldviews. And I consider this personally because I've experienced it myself. A lot of you that know me know that I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up in a 7,000 person town. I think actually it's a population 7,500. And now my town is also 99.2% white. It is 0.18% African American. I checked these statistics this morning. If you do the math on that, that works out to about 13 and a half people in my entire town, of which my family is 5. So there was a point, actually, when I was in preschool, when I was the only student of color in my entire school, pre-K through 8, which is insane. There's no way that this should be allowed to, there's no way that this kind of racial segregation, in the sense de facto segregation, this should still be allowed to exist. And so, growing up being the only non-white voice in my classrooms just became normal, but such a situation wildly stunts the amount of academic discourse that it can occur. So for example, when I was in 8th grade, we had a classroom discussion about racism because we were learning about the civil rights movement at the time. And the students in my class all said, when my teacher asked us what our thoughts were about the state of race relations in our society, all of the white students in my class had said, "Oh, what do you mean? There's no racism. We just re-elected Barack Obama. This isn't a problem. Everyone's happy and we don't have these issues in our modern day society." But of course, being the one student that was there, saying that I can personally attest to racism that exists in our society, being able to have those diverse voices there are fundamental to promoting healthy and a wider worldview in general. So it's not that the other students in my class were necessarily prejudiced, that there was something negative that was happening within their own beliefs. It's just the fact that they simply hadn't had to interact with many worldview beliefs that were different from their own. But if we're supposed to be promoting global education in our society, I know this is a big word in education today, where students are supposed to go out and be prepared to interact with beliefs and opinions that are not their own, they're going to have to meet people that are not the same as them, they're going to have to work with them, they're going to have to interact with them on a daily basis, they are going to have to deal with them. It's not an avoidable thing. This is going to happen. But if we're truly trying to prepare schools for the future generations, and we're not able to promote a wider range of voices within our schools in order to promote that kind of academic discourse, that richness, that diversity can provide, how can we truly prepare our students for the real world? Time.
Questions? Mr. Gassenbieder.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. What should we do about places like Morehouse College? If we want to encourage this huge, this vast array of voices that are prepared for the real world, when their statistics are 97.1% of their student population is Black or African American, 0.1% is white, 0.7% is Hispanic or Latino, 0.3% is multiracial. This clearly doesn't correspond to what we want.
Well, I think first of all, you have to consider the history of the schools. They're called historical Black colleges for a reason. They were formed because students literally had no other school that they could attend. And so if you opt to attend that, you have a choice of where you want to attend school when it comes to colleges. But the fact of the matter is that we want to be able to promote intellectual diversity, and that comes from different voices. But I think it's a matter of colleges are not, like you said, they're not exclusive. It's a matter of promoting those other voices, and it's not necessarily Morehouse's fault that they don't have more white students or Latinx students, but it's just a matter of how could they bring in those more diverse voices. Just because it's historically Black doesn't mean it has to stay that way.
Further questions? Mr. Jason.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, speaking from experience as well, I've seen those diverse programs fall apart where people simply hang out with their own ethnic group, their own group. It's particularly egregious for Chinese international students abroad. I'm saying myself. They simply hang out with people that they know, people speak the language they know, and they don't bother to, even if that's put together with people of other races, they don't bother to integrate. If you add on top of that, studies from New doesn't necessarily change their mind. It usually doesn't. How does positive mandatory integration stand given those facts?
Yeah, this is a problem. But it's, I mean, first of all, just the fact that at least the effort is made of that now they're in a different environment, at least helps to ease that burden a little bit. But the fact that just in order to, well, these students they'll share the same classes at the very least, and just hopefully in being able to interact with these students more than they normally would, just being in their their normal school district if they're going someplace else. I think at the very least they can sow the seeds of a further relationship, even though there might be that initial barrier.
And that, Miss Mirzik,